Illustrator is a great place to make artwork and assets for our web designs, particularly if we're creating vectors, obviously. And I've got some work here that I need to export out into appropriate file formats for my website build. I've produced a series of kind of icons that I need to incorporate, and I've also got my client's logo there. And I've put that work together on two separate artboards. If we have a look at the artboards there, you can see artboard 1 I've renamed as icons, and artboard 2 renamed as logo. I make a practice of changing my artboard names as I make them to ensure that when I export this material, the file names are as I want them to be. Let's have a look under File and Export, and we'll see there's a few options there. We've got the Save for Web Legacy tool, which is very similar to the Photoshop tool that we've looked at before, but we're going to use the Export for Screens option this time around. See what we can export using that interface. When we open that up, on the right hand side we can see some thumbnails of our artboards. We can select and deselect those. On the right hand side we've got some export options. I'm going to set an output folder on my desktop. Give it a new name. It's calling it output in this case. I'm going to choose that. So all of the assets that I create will be filtered out into that folder in there, and I can add that material into a subfolder if I want. I can select a range of artboards if that's appropriate, but I can just deselect these thumbnails if I didn't want to export this logo. I could deselect that. Down the bottom here we've got the file formats that we're going to export to, and on this left hand column is our scale, and I want to export it as 1:1. We can add a suffix if we like. I'm not going to do that, and we can also add designate what kind of file we want to export to. JPEG at 80%, 50, 20, PNG, and we can export SVGs from Illustrator because we're working with vectors rather than pixels. For this first export, I'm just going to export PNGs. Actually, maybe I'll export JPEGs just for the hell of it at an actual at a 1:1 ratio. And I'm going to click Export. And it's opened up that folder that I designated, and we can see in there that we've got our two separate JPEG files, which is excellent. What about if I wanted to export out these items separately, separate icons? Because you can see here that what's happened is it's exported out. If I just quickly go back to that output folder, it's exported out all of those icons as one complete image. That's probably not what you're going to want with an icon set. I'm going to want separate individual files for each icon, and we can do that if we look at another window which is called the Asset Export window. You can see over on the right hand side that this is our shortcut icon to it. So let's open that up there. Before we do that, I'll just go back to the Export for Screens tool, and I'll just point out that there is a tab for assets over here. So we've got our artboards and then our assets, but we've currently got no assets kind of lined up in the queue to export. So that's what we're going to do with the Asset Export panel. We can simply drag assets into that panel, and it will create an asset for us to export. You can see that it labels the assets pretty poorly, and we'll want to change that. Because it will use that label as our file name. So I've just changed that to icon number 1. And now I can drag in all of the assets that I want to export. This is going to be our logo. Change that name. Now we can also, to speed things up, we can also select multiple items. And if I hit this button here, which is generate multiple assets from the selection, if I hit that, it will bring in all of those separate vectors as individual assets, and I can go ahead and rename them. I might just quickly copy that so that I can quickly rename those. So excellent. So there I've got a few more that I could put in there, but this will do us at the moment. Now I can twirl down my export settings here, and I've got kind of a shortcut into that export for screens panel that we looked at before. I can also, if I click on this button here, will actually launch that export for screens dialog box. I might just do that just for the hell of it. And you can see that now when we click from artboards to assets, we've got all of these separate assets that we can export, and so we can select which ones we might want to export, and we're going to export all of them at the moment, and we're going to set the destination as that same output folder, and we're going to export PNGs at 100%, but I'm also going to add another scale, so potentially for retina screens, definitely for high density screens, you might need a higher resolution file or a file that's got a lot more pixels in it. So I've added that by 2 PNG to our export operator here. And it's going to automatically add the suffix with the @ symbol 2x to the end of that, so that we can differentiate, the 100% files to the 200% files. And let's go ahead and do that and look at the outcome. Flick over to our folder here. It's opened up for us, and we can see that it's created those subfolders because I had the subfolder option selected, and it's exported all of those elements out as separate PNG files, and it's also exported out the 200% version for higher resolution screens. Awesome. So to recap, export for screens is a great tool, very useful tool to export our vectors from Illustrator for our web design builds and design work. We can access our artboards to export and our assets from the export for screen dialog box, and we can also manage that material in the asset export panel independently.